Before we jump in, I wanted to let you know about something new. I'm really excited about it. It's called The Nest, our online community, and I'd love to see you inside. Each month, I'm hosting 2 live virtual sessions where we can come together for group coaching, body doubling, real conversations, and occasional guest experts who'll share their wisdom with us. You'll also get access to the community itself, where you can meet fellow Wise Squirrels, you can get episodes early, tap into extra resources, and you can enjoy plenty of good things I'm adding along the way. It's all waiting for you in the Nest. Visit wisesquirrels.com/nest for details, and I'll see you inside. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, the podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. I'm recording today with a bright blue sky and a thin layer of white snow, and trees and power lines with a really thick layer of ice. No, I'm not outside. That was a sound effect. Thought you would like that. We're still holding our breaths that our power remains for what we hope to be the final week of single-digit temperatures in Nashville. You know, that's negative digits for the rest of the world using Celsius, by the way. You know, this Canadian lad, I can handle winter, but it's colder in Nashville right now than it is in my home and native town, Toronto. I should add there that it was like 300,000 people in Nashville at the peak without power. I think we're down to about 140,000 still without power. But with the ice and possible wind later, there is a chance that more trees will topple. God, I hope not. Or more branches will snap off. And got my fingers crossed. I'm hoping for the best here. Hope it's warm and cozy and you have power wherever you are listening to this. A quick note, I've already met a few wonderful people this year who have spent time with me for a complimentary coaching session. I call these my Good Fit coaching sessions, and I'd like to extend this offer to you now. The link is included, or you can just visit wisesquirrels.com to sign up. That link is in the description of the show notes of this episode in your podcast player, so just go ahead and click that now. My space is limited, by the way, so do it today if you'd like to see if my coaching is a good fit for you. And I want to help you hit your goals this year. So click the link and you can get more details there. Today, we are diving deep into the messy, beautiful, and often life-changing process of finding clarity after a late life ADHD diagnosis. You know, for many of us wise squirrels, that diagnosis is the moment we finally stop feeling broken, right? And we realize we've just been navigating the world with a differently wired brain, what I call my operating system. So joining me today to explore this journey is licensed clinical social worker Amanda Johnson. Amanda has over 15 years of experience specializing in trauma, attachment, and nervous system healing. She utilizes EMDR, somatic experiencing, and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, CAP, to help people process complex trauma. So in this episode, we're covering things like the nuance of neurodivergence, so why so many women are first discovering ADHD through their journey into motherhood. We talk about memory and trauma and the difference between the stories we tell and the implicit memories our bodies hold on to. We also talk about some misinformation about trauma and ADHD. Amanda talks about the science of CAP, that ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and how it's being used as a transformative tool to bypass our mental roadblocks and to foster true neuroplasticity. This is something I'm interested in for sure. I haven't tried it myself, and I'm not an expert here, of course, which is why I'm talking to Amanda. But of course, you know, speak to your doctor before trying things. Of course, this podcast is never medical advice, so keep that in mind too. Finally, we talk about reframing your past and strategies for moving from trying harder or working differently while embracing your natural strengths. You know, whether you're still in that emotional reckoning stage of a new diagnosis or you're ready to start reframing your history with self-compassion, this conversation is for you. And if you are feeling that reckoning after diagnosis, just realize that your future is going to be so much brighter now that you know your operating system. So get the treatment that you need, and keep listening to Wise Squirrels. That's the big purpose of this show, is really to help you and me along the journey. Okay, let's get into this. Here is my interview with Amanda Johnson. If you find it valuable, helpful, of course, friend, would you please follow the show? Click that follow button, leave a rating and a review. This really does help others discover the show. And when you leave a review, that also, I get to read that and see it. And I'm like, oh, wow, somebody listened to the show and they liked it. Yay! Unless you don't like it, in which case you don't have to leave that rating and review. In fact, just let's keep it between us, okay?
So my name is Amanda Johnson. I've focused a lot of my career and special interest learning on deep diving into somatic healing, trauma therapy. I've been really fascinated with understanding how different types of memory can really lead and drive our sense of our identity, and how to best support people to take a different look at it, something that they're not used to, kind of like a different vantage point than they're used to thinking about things. So how that shows up is I've been exploring both traditional therapeutic methods and psychedelic assisted therapy to get this different vantage point that I think can help people unlock different forms of healing.
Yeah, and some of your training, you're a licensed therapist, is that correct?
Yes, licensed clinical social worker is the type of license I hold.
Yeah.
One of the therapy license out there.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And I think and you shared, we were talking beforehand about your own diagnosis in just January. Hello, welcome, Wise Squirrel. Tell me a little bit about that journey too, about how you discovered you have ADHD, and share a little bit about that.
Yeah. The personal piece has been really interesting for me. I don't know if you know the little saying, research is me search.
Yeah.
But I've found that, a lot of the things that have caught my attention, there's been some sort of personal component to them. ADHD has been grabbing my attention more and more, both through trying to understand my husband's diagnosis. He also did a late diagnosis recently for ADHD, as well as some factors that were showing up in my child that we were seeking OT and sensory support for, which I think is a common reason why women later on end up exploring it for themselves, is going through a process with their child. And our son doesn't have ADHD diagnosed at this point, but in looking at some of the profiles of some of the sensory processing pieces and attention and motivation, it's been fascinating to unearth. I think the other thing that started to kind of happen for me is, as I've gotten older and tried to balance different roles of motherhood, working, marriage, entrepreneurship, being self-employed, I think what used to be sort of hidden within earlier systems and structures, all of a sudden, when it was up to me to organize things, all the cracks in the foundation started to show. I went to the trouble of doing formal psych testing just because I was nervous. What if I know enough about it, I accidentally trick the assessor or the diagnostician into giving me a diagnosis that's not real?
Oh, that's interesting.
True.
Yeah.
Funny, I had the suspicion that I could, just with my professional background, unintentionally.
Yeah.
So I went to the trouble of doing full neuropsych testing because I wanted something that was the most objective as possible. I worked with a really lovely clinician, very neuroaffirming here, and just kind of got the information that the ADHD was valid, and then level 1 autism.
For those who haven't maybe gone through that process of more of a sort of unbiased, deeper dive diagnosis, because I know ADHD diagnosis itself can be a little tricky. depending on the doctor that, or the person that you're speaking with about it. So, in my own experience, it's a longer story, but the short version is like I saw a therapist, a psychologist who diagnosed me, and I saw him. I did 2 like talk sessions with him, and I did an ADHD kind of written assessment. But then it was years later, having missed that diagnosis somehow, or that's the longer part, which I won't get into. It's too boring. Uh, but then I went to my GP because I thought I had ADHD maybe, or to go for an assessment. And he did like a written assessment with me and just a brief sort of interview, and then kind of fired up my charts and found those sessions from several years earlier and said, yeah, all of this combined, plus, I tick a lot of boxes on being diagnosed. Of course, like I have like a free ADHD assessment at wisesquirrels.com that anybody can take. I don't see the results, but I always, add that you really do need to speak to a healthcare professional as well to get a proper diagnosis. So in order to do that deeper dive, what did that look like for your diagnosis? Like besides a written assessment and an interview perhaps, but like, was there more to it than that, or?
Yeah, so from her process, what she put together was a lot of these different standardized psych testing measures. And so there's ones that are more experiential. They're actually testing impulsivity and different aspects of ADHD in the moment, and comparing the way you're relating to this test with a baseline. And there's all these different pieces that they're trying to pull. They do IQ testing. They pull in different self-report along with ones that the psychometrist will actually give to you. So there's pieces of it that are, asking the person to kind of self-report, and parts that attempt to get closer to more objective in the moment. How is this person doing with these tasks that measure some of the executive function, deficits that show up in ADHD. There's also a piece of it that is a clinical interview. And this is something that I don't know if average consumers of mental health care know, but ADHD and other aspects of like autism and some of those pieces are really true specialties. So if you go to a general practitioner, you might have the assumption this person would know how to tease this out, or they'd be thinking about all the possibilities before they arrive at a conclusion around what they think is going on with me. But what you don't realize is every practitioner sort of has a lot of subjectivity in the way they're diagnosing people, including blind spots and things that they've never been trained in. And because adult ADHD is such a specialty, your average mental health therapist does not have training in it. So if you're thinking they're able to detect it and identify it, that assumption could be true or not true. And unfortunately, it's a blind spot for a lot of folks. So I also went the route of finding someone that was neuroaffirming. That was a big deal for me because there's a lot of folks that have bias towards adults coming into an office asking for an ADHD eval. Are they going to be open about their bias? Maybe, maybe not. But you'll feel it as they are either attempting to disqualify the diagnosis or sort of shoot down what you're saying. You'll sort of feel the idea. I don't know do you have any kind of felt sense of, after seeing different people, how you were like embraced when you were asking these questions? I'm curious if you felt any of that.
Well, I mean, just to be clear, and like I'm not a doctor, so I don't. So if you mean like in the conversations I've had and the research and stuff that I've done, absolutely, yeah, you touched on a bunch of stuff there. Like I think one of the big pieces of advice I give people who are undiagnosed and think they may have ADHD is to not only obviously go see your doctor, or, you can do an online, like a qualified online assessment, like the one on our website. But in addition to that, you have to go speak to a healthcare professional, a doctor who can diagnose you, with a caveat that I think the first question you should ask your doctor is, what do you think about ADHD? Instead of, I think I have ADHD and blah, blah, blah. Instead, it's, ask them like openly, like sort of, what are your thoughts on ADHD? Because I always tell people that if your doctor says, oh, it's just a fad or it's overdiagnosed or it's not real or whatever, then
Mhm.
it's time to find a new doctor immediately because that doctor, because that is absolutely wrong. And not only wrong, but it's dangerous because your doctor may also not believe in cancer or diabetes or
Mhm.
right. So what other misconceptions can that doctor have? Right. So to me, that's a big red flag. If your doctor says anything contrary to ADHD is real. They may refer to it, by the way, as I always say, like as ADD, and that's only because they changed the name to confuse us, right?
Mhm.
So they do that, and that's been done multiple times, and probably will happen again. Um, as far as you mentioned something a while back, I did want to touch on, and which is, and I don't know, like through the testing you did, I think maybe it was a more thorough kind of overall analysis to try to determine whether, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but whether to determine it. You said like, and correct me where I'm wrong, it wasn't just an ADHD test. It was more like a thorough test to see maybe there's autism, maybe there's other things involved.
Mhm.
And I think of that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but because you mentioned IQ, and I did want to point out, and first of all, I know nothing or very little about autism, and I wouldn't recommend anybody listen to the show if they're looking to learn about autism, because that's not what I'm doing here. I'm only one guy getting my head around ADHD, let alone
Mhm.
something else. So with ADHD, at least, IQ has nothing to do with ADHD. So you can be like Einstein, who was believed to maybe have ADHD, but you can be brilliant and have ADHD, and you can be a complete dumbass and have ADHD. So just to point that out. But yeah, so in my experiences, yeah, I find it's very important to have that conversation first with your doctor. I
Mhm.
think if that answers your question, I can't remember now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that is great to sort of get the lay of the land to try to tease out how would this person respond to the possibility that I'd like to move forward with an eval. And yeah, the psych testing, it does kind of go through the whole kind of possibilities of different, mental health diagnoses and things like that, because they're trying to kind of not necessarily go in looking for evidence of one piece, but kind of get samples of symptoms across the spectrum to see um, what diagnosis bucket is filling up the most. And so
Yeah,
it's a way to kind of take a really broad view. The way my brain worked is I was more curious about it, just being in the field, and wanted to see what it felt like. There was a big curiosity too to go through the process. It's not, of course, required. And for a lot of people, that would be out of range. It's an expensive process to go through. It's labor intensive. It takes time. So I recognize some of the privilege I've had in even being able to access that level of complex diagnostic process. Yeah.
yeah, and it's a great point. Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to discover you have ADHD through sort of some of the stuff we've talked about, but yeah, I mean, more and more. And again, I'm in no way an expert on autism, but obviously, I mean, it is now an acronym. At least you see used. I don't even know if it's a medical acronym, but the ADHD, the AU ADHD, meaning autism and ADHD. So yeah, if you're lucky enough and you can get that testing, I do encourage folks to do that because you know if you didn't know you have ADHD and you still don't know you have autism, I mean, it would be great to know that too, right? And it's interesting as well. So many women were missed, uh,
Mhm.
like completely, because my understanding, at least, is that that there's one ADHD. There's not three types. There's one type of ADHD, but there's three presentations.
Mhm.
And one of those presentations, I always use the analogy of like Bart Simpson being and a girl could also be hyperactive, inattentive, but it's mainly boys. And like me, who was the one disrupting the class, thus why we were the ones diagnosed more as kids. Because if a girl's playing with her hair, looking out the window, failing or passing or doing well, the teacher may be like, whatever, they're not disrupting the class at least. So they're not even
Mhm.
thinking about it. But of course, with inattentive ADHD inattentive presentation, Lisa Simpson, Right. She's more that presentation of ADHD, I should say. And then there's the combined presentation. And that we're not actually, this is something else I've learned, is that we're not just one, we may be one presentation more so during a period of our lives, but it doesn't mean we will be that presentation throughout our lives. So we may be, as we mature or we find coping mechanisms or masking, or we may become more combined or more hyperactive or whatever. So it evolves over time based on our own personalities and how we kind of show up in the world. So it is fascinating.
Yeah. No, and it's fun. And there's a lot of mixed emotions. But when I look back in my life, I can sort of see all the little pieces that the data point in and of itself wasn't that noticeable. But when you add up all of it, it was like, wow, there was a lot happening that was missed. And I think, yeah, we normed a lot of the behaviors around little boys, both with autism and ADHD. So, we didn't have as much of a sense of how it showed up in the way girls are socialized as well.
Hey, I'm not sure if you know about this, but I was a speaker and a trainer for Google for nearly 6 years. In addition to this, I've been a coach through a lot of my career, helping small business owners and entrepreneurs improve their businesses. But now with ADHD, I've learned a lot about helping other wise squirrels like me. Check out the link at wisesquirrels.com/coaching and book a free session with me to see if I can help you. I have a feeling I can.
So it's been fascinating to kind of look at it from all sorts of different angles. And I think, for a long time, I was, so curious about trauma therapy because I kept seeing myself as a person who was holding on to a lot of unresolved trauma and was going on this deep dive incessantly to kind of figure out how to, heal myself and also bring better healing to clients. What is interesting, though, is there's some pieces of, using myself as an example of the autism or the ADHD that if you just keep applying a trauma framework to them, you're just missing the mark. You have to figure out how to embrace and include some of these pieces as opposed to, continue to be on this relentless hunt for more and more trauma healing. And it was very helpful for me to kind of bring in that lens because then things like ongoing treatment, accommodations, or just general compassion for myself have helped me feel a lot more whole as opposed to keep seeing this as like, trauma that will just never heal. And that's a big way that a lot of therapists right now are conceptualizing things using trauma-informed care to kind of support clients. And while I think that is really helpful, if you're not looking at the whole picture, you can almost be attempting to support someone, but without really seeing the full picture.
And I think that the connection to trauma itself is so interesting. I like how you were talking about earlier too, and how you just mentioned in a sense, like I always joke that like every productivity expert out there, like the people that have written books and things, I know some of them, the podcasters who are productivity experts, I have no doubt they're ADHDers. You know what I mean? It's like we solve the problems. It's part of how I show up as a coach as well when I'm coaching my clients, because we're trying to solve the problems we've had, and we see it in other people, and from our own coping mechanisms and our own solutions on helping us in the productivity sense, like how to make sure we show up on time and how to make sure we hit our goals and hit our deadlines and so on and so forth. To me, I believe that like the people that are truly experts at this probably, without, diagnosing them, of course, but probably have ADHD, and they've probably been trying to solve these problems for themselves. That's why like so many people that I know myself who have faced trauma, especially in childhood or, as young adults, became social workers and therapists. It's because, they want to show up and help others face what they've faced in their lives And it makes sense. I mean, you have this empathy when you especially know what it's like to be in those shoes, right? So whether you knowingly or unknowingly are trying to solve, not necessarily solve problems, but at least serve people to help them, I think is a noble thing. The other piece I'll mention here, because we're talking about trauma, is and I've been kind of vocal about this on social media, to whatever point that is. It's important that people follow the experts who truly know what they're talking about. I find so often online, especially, somebody who may be an expert in X and Y is adjacent to X, they may start talking about Y without being an expert in Y. And they may start either misinformation or just assumptions, and instead not saying, like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's this fear these days, it seems, that people just are not saying, I don't know. Like, it's okay. Like, just say, I don't know. I'd have to look into that or research it or talk to someone who knows. Like I always say, I'm not a doctor. But I say that because of one person in particular, a fellow Canadian, Gabor Mate, who's incredibly, I mean, obviously, I believe he's a Holocaust survivor. I think that's right. And he's obviously, he does a lot of great work, and he's incredibly nice to listen to. He's got the greatest voice if you want to just chill. The problem, though, is that he is one of the biggest sources of misinformation when it comes to the connection of, or the misinformation about the connection to ADHD and trauma, which he has uttered and written about and talked about on so many big podcasts. And then that lie gets spread so that people think, well, I didn't face trauma, so I don't have ADHD. There is a connection that we can talk about that I've kind of landed on as it applies to trauma and ADHD. But to be 100% clear, there's no science or research or consensus that trauma causes ADHD. Have you come across this in your research, or some of this stuff, or some of this kind of misinformation out there?
Yeah, his presence is really profound and powerful, and he's a really prolific speaker and someone to listen to. And I think he has a lot of beautiful insights globally about how trauma in general can sort of distort the way we're taking in kind of present day information. There's a lot of value to his work, but I have over the years, heard him riff on that topic, and it was tempting to kind of, based on his authority, kind of just go with what he was saying. And I've seen some folks put out really beautiful kind of rebuttals to his statements and show evidence. And I think it's been really profound to kind of make sure there's enough research-based information about ADHD and, the fact that it's not, just untreated, undiagnosed trauma. It's a real thing. And I think it is a little dangerous sometimes when someone holds a lot of authority in the space and they're speaking, but they're not really owning, like you said, the fact that that's not been a major area of his kind of academic studies.
Right.
He has lived experience and knows about it from different angles, but he's formed more of an opinion, which is dangerous to present like evidence.
Yeah. And that's my beef. That's my point too. Like, and you said that well, because like I said, like he has, like you said, I mean, without reiterating everything you said, because you hit it, like, he does some good work, but the problem is, it's not that he just riffed and stated this. Like, he's saying it over and over again. He's writing about it. So and I'm sure people have said, like, Dr. Russell Barkley, who is an authority on ADHD, has done multiple videos kind of talking about this on his YouTube channel. And it's irresponsible for him. It's one thing to say it once and be corrected and then say, you know what, retract it and say, you know what, I've been like, I've on this show, I kept saying there's 3 types of ADHD. And I keep trying to say, remember, no, there's 1 type, 3 presentations. Now, maybe that will change in the future, but that's science. Um, but it drives me crazy when I hear him say this, because then somebody with a ton of authority and respect, and with good reason, like I love Mel Robbins' work. She's tons of fun, and I enjoy her approach to stuff. I'm listening to her latest book, and I'm enjoying that too.
Mm-hmm.
But she interviews him, so she gives him a big audience. He, misinforms her of these assumptions, and then she goes on Smartless and talks to, like, the number 1 podcast, and then they start talking about ADHD, and most of which she said was right, except she reiterated some of what he said. And same with some of the cast or some of the members or the hosts of that show. And then that spreads to millions of listeners who then continue to believe this misinformation. And yeah, I wish Gabor Mate, who seems like a good guy, would just come out and say I was wrong about this specific thing, because it's irresponsible for him to do otherwise. And it makes me feel like it makes me discredit anything he says. I'm not going to trust him because he's lying about this, and he's been saying it long enough and not retracting it. Then why trust anything he says? Because so. Not to be, this episode is not about beating up on Gabor Mate.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this, and also what I've learned. And again, I'm always open to criticism or feedback from folks, but when it comes to trauma and ADHD, head trauma can cause ADHD to a lesser degree, but that is something it's highly heritable. It's almost as heritable as height. So that's one of the main ways one can have ADHD. Really, probably the main ways. There's also pollution, lead in water, things like that could cause a child in utero to develop ADHD as well. Again, this is my understanding, but the trauma piece that I've landed on recently. And I feel the future is so bright if we keep talking about this and people keep getting diagnosed and getting treated if they have ADHD and I'm curious what your take is on this idea. I think that a lot, I can't say everybody, but I feel like a lot of undiagnosed ADHDers as kids, especially our generation as kids, probably face some sort of trauma because of this undiagnosed ADHD. Now, I believe, in my own example, I did face trauma as a result of my parents being, one or both, also being undiagnosed and untreated with ADHD back then, and understanding the connection between addiction and impulsivity and these types of things. My dad, after a bunch of drinks, would be a jerk, and say harmful, mean things. We became great once we, in our adulthood, we became a lot closer. But I think we're at this point right now where if adults with ADHD get diagnosed and treated for their ADHD and they have kids, and maybe they've got the kid diagnosed first and see it in themselves, which is often the case, especially with women, it's amazing. It's an amazing time because the parents are learning about it for themselves. They're approaching things way differently now, understanding their kids and themselves, that they can treat their kids with kindness and with empathy and with understanding. And that kid can be raised without that trauma of an undiagnosed, untreated parent. And I feel like the future is really bright for the young generation now growing up, because of destigmatizing this and because of embracing mental health and therapy and things like this. I feel like the future will be better and brighter and there'll be less childhood trauma as a result of this. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, that is a really beautiful opportunity to think about that because I do think in general we're understanding neurodivergent brains more and figuring out how to adjust or create accommodations on different levels and probably the improved detection and better focused treatment. I think, I hope that makes a big shift. And I do think, there is, when you think about someone who didn't have all the information about themselves and couldn't contextualize why certain patterns were showing up, there's just a lot of probability of misattunement and kind of attributing uh, deficits or difficulties to lack of will or these constant injuries in someone's self-esteem. So if you have the hidden information available, I could see that making a big difference in having that in the context every time you go to interact with behavior or try to understand something in another person. I think it makes a big difference in couples when they get that information and how to include it in the context of how to interpret the other person's behavior. I'm sure it makes a world of difference in like parent-child dynamics. And I think a lot about without that piece illuminating why, how misunderstood people were. And, oddly enough, being misunderstood in my clinical practice is one of the most painful things for folks. We don't talk about it as much as I think we should, but behind the scenes, I've found being misunderstood or misperceived is a huge trigger for people relationally. So just as an aside.
Tell me more about that. Because I do know you do the Are We Done couples counseling as well. So this is in your wheelhouse. So tell me about that.
Well, think about how many arguments go back and forth where someone is just fighting to the death to make sure the other person is aware of their intention and has so much trouble owning the fact that regardless of their intention, they did some type of behavior or action that caused harm. Like people will fight to the death to kind of not own the harmful thing they did and just reiterate the intention or why or what was going on with them behind the scenes. So people often want to be known for being good, for being benevolent, or if they were struggling in a moment, for the person to understand they were having a hard time or they were anxious or whatever's happening behind the scenes. But I have a lot of trouble kind of owning, regardless of what was going on with me, I did in fact yell at you, or I did in fact try to control you, or I did in fact criticize you. So that's why I've just noticed it's such a sticking point for arguments to get stuck in that, kind of verbal back and forth of like, you have to understand why I did it over and over and over.
Yeah, it's like the worst tennis game ever. It's like just drop the ball. Stop playing the tennis. Come over and have a hug. How about flying out?
I would wonder too how much people are sensitized to that if they had ADHD or undiagnosed ADHD, where they constantly were having interpersonal issues as a result of some of the difficulties, but people kind of assigning something like a really negative sense of that person as a result of what was going on with them, forgetting things, losing things, not following through, not being consistent, interrupting, all the things that can sometimes create big fallouts in relationships. So,
yeah, I had Melissa Orlov on the podcast a long time ago, and who wrote a great book about ADHD couples. And one thing that really stuck out to me was she was talking about this parent-child dynamic when one of the partners is neurotypical and the other, has ADHD and yeah, so obviously in her example, this doesn't always happen, but she explained how the neurotypical person will take on this unknowingly even will take on
Mhm.
sort of parenting role, and the other will take on this childlike role. And not to fault either one, but for the neurotypical person in the relationship, they're just like, forget it, I'll just take care of everything myself. But then they become overwhelmed and annoyed because their partner's forgetting things, or whatever the case may be. But then the flip side of that, and it's not the neurotypical person in that couple isn't out of the, isn't it doesn't mean they get out of jail free card. Like, they also have to understand, and do, but the other side of it is the child, adult in this situation, um becomes resentful, and also may feel rejected as well, and just upset because they're constantly being sort of, undermined in their authority in the relationship as well, um,
Mhm.
which I find interesting. Is that something you see as well?
Yeah, I think that over functioning, under functioning, or parent child, or like student teacher, you can figure out different names depending on
Mhm.
what you like to use, but that comes up a lot, and it's never where it happened all at once. It's this slow drift into these extreme polarizations, and each person does start to gather this, um, core negative image of the other person,
Mm.
about who they are, whether it being too controlling, always trying to be right, or just, inept, not caring. People start to attach big, um, wounds to it. If they have a history of not feeling like respected or mattering, it can start to build on childhood trauma, family of origin stuff that's lingering, and build up to these really painful stuck dynamics for two people. Um, but it's always just these micro shifts, I feel like, little by little over time. And then all of a sudden you wake up and there's something really imbalanced. But yeah, both people are typically suffering a lot in those polarized roles.
Mm.
You know what I was thinking? In addition to that one, what do you think about sort of the interest based motivation causing difficulties with sort of keeping connection going, or finding some of the, you know, folks feeling like their interest waxes and wanes over time in long-term relationships? Have you heard people talking about that much?
The interest in their spouse or their partner, you mean? Like, kind of their shared interest, maybe, that brought them together, or
Shared interests, or how for ADHD brains, the motivation is often when there's a lot of connection to like a the interest of the day, the interest of the week, or their special interest. And I was wondering, how you've seen that play out,
yeah.
in long-term relationships. Have you noticed anything or heard people talk about that much?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me personally, like, I can speak from my own experience with my wife, who's neurotypical. Excuse me. That, you know, um, we're empty nesters now this year, so it's interesting because, yeah, I mean, suddenly we don't have the kids to manage, and in some cases maybe micromanage a little, or maybe a lot sometimes. Um, and so with them kind of gone, they're not living with us anymore, and they're doing their own thing. Excuse me, my wife and I are kind of, okay, like, trying to figure out other stuff. So I find, like, for us it's not a problem, um, but I could see where that could become one, where the attention, shifts, maybe to the spouse as opposed to the kids, because they're not around anymore. So I don't know if couples might face that. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's a great question. I don't know enough. So, but, besides my own personal experiences, um, but I was going to ask you too, like, with couples, because you said your husband and you both, have ADHD, and you're both late diagnosed as well. I
Mhm.
I do find, and of course, I don't believe there's any science or research to back this up, but I do find that there is this kind of, anecdotal thing where it seems that ADHDers tend to find themselves, like, uh, this first came up when I joked that I came out of the mental health closet when I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I put it on Facebook. I'm like, hey, everybody, guess what? I have ADHD, because I had all these friends from my youth reaching out who were like, Dave, you wouldn't believe how many of us also have ADHD. And so we tend to kind of find each other in a way. And again, that's more anecdotal than anything else. But I'm curious for maybe not necessarily your relationship specifically, unless you want to share stuff there, but with couples that are both neurodivergent, both have ADHD, how are those? What are some of the challenges that they may face? Maybe being late diagnosed as well. Uh,
Well, one thing that comes up, the stuff that tends to bother us the most can be insecurities or difficulties we have. Something I think that comes up is sort of the, ADHD brains use a lot of shame, anxiety, all sorts of negative affect states to sort of manage and cope when it's not supported well enough. And so I think some of the contempt you can have for a partner and some of the difficulties they're experiencing might be pieces that you yourself feel a lot of shame about, or are aware of and frustrate you about yourself. So, I think that can sometimes butt up against each other. I also think, sometimes people have very different parts of, ADHD that might mean there's a bigger hill to climb or burden in the family. Like if both folks are really struggling to do some of the mundane, house maintenance projects or can avoid, figuring out how to sign the kid up for sports. All that is confusing until you figure it out. If there's not, one neurotypical brain or a community to draw from or someone to body double with or some workaround, it's like that family potentially has a bigger kind of burden, how they're going to figure out how to do all of these mental load tasks that exist in society, especially when you have kids or accessing different sorts of healthcare. The ADHD tax might sort of double in a family where there's two folks dealing with that. All sorts of things I think could either exacerbate or somehow sink into the interpersonal dynamic where, they're mad at their partner for forgetting something, but they're also experiencing frustration knowing that that's something they themselves struggle with or just made a mistake about earlier that day too. I do think on the plus side, though, there could, in a neuroaffirming house where everyone's sort of getting it, they might be more open to accommodations. And, we don't mind having Post-it notes by the door with our reminder of what we need to leave the house with, because it's going to help everyone here. And we can role model that for kids and we're going to be more successful. So they might be more open to tweaking some of the, the way the house is set up or, how the refrigerator's laid out or different things like that, if it's going to help everyone in the family thrive.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a great point. And I could imagine like a home with just like Post-it notes everywhere. But hell, I mean, that's awesome. And especially to your point, especially if you have kids too, who also are neurodivergent, then that they see the Post-it notes and they're like, yeah, this, like, it's a no-brainer for them later as they get older to have their walls filled with Post-it note reminders and things. So, I could see that being really beneficial, actually. I remember my wife, I've talked about this before, but my wife has this paper calendar, like magnetic calendar on the fridge, and she writes down when the kids are going to be here or whatever, especially when they were at school here too. So we could, she could just keep track of stuff. And I told her, like, I'm more like, I need a digital calendar. Like, I need to be able to see it on my calendar. And so, and I said, like, I'm sorry, like, it's not working for me. Like, I don't mind you writing it on the calendar. That's great. But if the kids benefit from it and you benefit from it, awesome. I just, even if I look at it, I'm going to forget what's on there when I walk away with my sandwich or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
and she finally gave in, which was, God bless her. This is how we've been together for 25 years or, um, is she finally said, all right. So I made this shared Google calendar, which I can overlay with my work calendar. So I know, and I'll say like, I'm out tonight at an event, or I'm traveling for a speaking engagement or whatever. And she can add stuff on there too. So she can refer to that as well. So we still have the fridge calendar, and it helps her. I don't know how often she looks at the digital one or not, but she adds it on there, which is a God's, it's so great, because then I know, I remember. It's not even that I need to remember it, as I look at my calendar every day. I live and die by my calendar. If it wasn't for my calendar, I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. Right.
Mhm.
Um, so that's just like one of those ways that we've worked together to kind of make things work. And I don't even remember if that happened actually, if she gave into that before I was diagnosed or after. I can't even remember now. But yeah, and I think that's a big part of this, right? And all we do is improving. And this is, I think, I mentioned like therapists who themselves have gone through trauma and become therapists because they want to help others, and social workers and so forth, or, productivity experts with ADHD solving the problems. Um,
Mhm.
for me, I always talk about how, like, I position myself as sort of a communications expert, because I'm a great public speaker. I love, training, speaking, all that stuff. But then I have so much background in digital and all that. I know different mediums and different ways to get messages out and to communicate effectively. But of course, when I look at it now through the lens of my ADHD, I'm like, oh, well, of course, I've always been trying to solve this problem. So,
Mhm.
and I think really, like, if we could take away anything from this too, I think it's communication. It's whether it's you yourself trying to improve how you show up in the world. It's getting help. It's getting professional help. If need be, that's great. Like therapy and what have you. But also as couples, improving the way you communicate, because I think ultimately that's what it comes down to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can very much see, the path and how some of what I got so passionate about learning was really an attempt to, understand or fill gaps. But I really grateful for a lot of my education because I think it helped have avenues of kind of regular access to exploring concepts and being very self-reflective and trying to solve the puzzle. And I think it's been a big reason why um, I've tended to some of the potential relational stuck points that were showing up was
Mhm.
just the relentless trying to figure out like how do people manage this or what makes people healthy interpersonally. So I am grateful for it. And the communication piece is another level that makes a lot of sense why you were drawn to that to explore it. It's
Yeah. Yeah. So I would be remiss not to, because we've talked about it before, offline, about ketamine treatment. And I'm no expert on it, but I did want to talk a little bit about that, because that's something else that you help with and advise on and so forth. And I do know anecdotally, but I do know, and again, I don't know the research here, but my understanding at least is that there is science and to back up how how ketamine treatment can help. Um, I wouldn't say cure, but I don't know, but certainly help with depression and anxiety and PTSD. And I expect trauma fits into that category as well. So, you know, I'm always careful with, making sure that we're sharing, the science out there. But what are your thoughts on that? Obviously, your bias, this is what you do, or part of what you do. So tell me about how ketamine can help folks who have experienced trauma and who have, working on overcoming or facing that and healing.
Mhm. It's a great question, and yeah, I like to offer things in a more conservative frame because I think while there is a lot of evidence to support how useful it is, there's always, you know, each person's unique context and how that interacts with the possibility of what it may or may not do for them. Um, so it's both and in on the broad scale, we've got some great data about it, and everyone's unique circumstances are influenced by lots of pieces. Um, which is why you might, in general, when people talk about mental health treatment, you get uh, people across the board, some really raving about what changed for them as a result of going through that process, and some, you know, finding it was mostly no change, and some might even report a negative experience as a result of attempting to do a process like that. So,
Mm.
um, the ketamine work has been really fascinating. It was something I explored personally before bringing into my professional skill set, which is kind of the story with everything I've learned how to do. It was a personal quest first. But um, what I like most about it is um, people become very familiar with how they conceptualize their problems. Uh, they've got, and I just very predictable scripts that they sort of have gotten used to kind of rationalizing or intellectualizing what's going on for them, both things that are hard for them, why they can't change, what's going on with other people. There's a lot of ways to do this, but ketamine is a really interesting opportunity to get out of that default mode network and have an opportunity to have a fresh perspective, like witness something that's really troubling, but from a new lens, a new vantage point, which is hard in our day to day because most of us are very just stuck in one mode of relying on these efficient strategies the brain came up with to have default schemas for interpreting everything.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I think is so interesting is, when trauma happens to people, a lot of us focus on how it affects explicit memories, essentially, or the type of memory that we can, share a story about. Like I could think in my brain and kind of pull up a little movie of an event and I can tell you about what happened. A lot of us think trauma is events that we can reference like that and they were overwhelming or objectively not okay. And that's the stuff that we typically are like, yes, I have trauma, or no, I don't have trauma. But the way I see it show up more is a lot more in implicit memory, which is memories that you might have felt during an experience, or even memories of kind of how you might default in, muscle memory or procedural memory, or the way you engage with things. So ketamine is really useful because it gives people a chance to go back and sometimes touch parts of the way we store information in our body that have nothing to do with the stories we tend to repeat about what was hard in our life. And that implicit memory tends to be a big piece of what's running the show. Why we might, I guess, what am I thinking? Oh, have you heard the term Sunday scaries?
No.
Okay, that's like a little cutesy term for how some people feel just like a general malaise or like dread Sunday evening about what's coming up. Um, so that's a good example of sort of just on repeat, the body's experiencing a particular mood or state. People could start to be compelled to like come up with a whole cognitive rationale about that, but you know, it's at the base of it, it's really just sort of like a state that got stuck and it comes up in rotation. So I don't always trust what people think, not because they're trying to be misleading. I don't trust my own thoughts most of the time because they're there are these stuck stories we just get used to saying to ourselves and really don't always have anything to do with the full picture of what's
Mm.
going on. And they tend to keep people more stuck than anything. So, what I like about working with ketamine, whether people are using lower doses or higher doses, is it's just a chance to dissolve and move behind that typical script that uh, may or may not be helping us get to the change we want. The other piece is, it'll open up a period of neuroplasticity in our brain after we're using it. And especially if we do kind of a treatment plan of like 6 dosing sessions in a row, we get this really cool opportunity for a lot more neuroplasticity. And a lot of times people are able to implement new routines and new behaviors with a lot more success if they're open to change and practice at the time they're using the medicine. So it's not a cure-all, like you can just passively take it in and everything's going to be better.
Yeah.
But for folks that are very motivated to get to the root cause of something and behaviorally pick a new path for managing it in the day-to-day, they get a lot of traction out of the medicine.
I like how your approach to things is so thorough and so, from what you've shared, not just about this, but also with your own diagnosis of ADHD and through that and autism through that process too, that you said at the very beginning of our conversation that you were worried that like you've seen it so much in others that you're like, are you just picking it in yourself? Like that's that. Right. And so I appreciate the fact that you are careful to not bias yourself, I guess, in a way. So that's pretty cool. Um, and the Sunday scary thing is funny. I've worked for myself for 13 years, so every day is a work day, and then again every day, is challenging. So that's probably why I'm not familiar with it. But right away when you explained it, I was thinking of like that famous line from Office Space, which is on the Monday, it's someone's got a case of the Mondays, uh, and so in a way. In a roundabout way, this is the best advertisement for ketamine ever. Like to do this, not just to get rid of the Sunday scaries, but also to prevent. Okay, so the Mondays. So for people that are novices, and I haven't done ketamine, or ketamine therapy like this. What you said 6 sessions. Like, what does that look like for someone? And like, is ketamine for somebody who's completely novice to this, like, is ketamine a drink? Is it injected? Is it a tab of acid? Obviously not something you smoke. So tell us what is ketamine
Yeah.
in this format, at least.
Yeah. Well, it's a medicine that's used all the time in emergency room settings. So it's been around for ages and is a very safe medicine, but typically used during more surgical or part of anesthesia. So, uh, in that way, I think that's comforting that it's not just used for this one therapeutic purpose, but really just has a long-standing kind of history and track record in medicine. But the way we use it clinically most often is depending on the setting. So there are places that focus mostly on IV ketamine, where sometimes an anesthesiologist has a side hustle and they've set up a ketamine clinic and they're doing it in this way. And the reason everyone says 6 sessions is because that's what's been studied. So when you study something, you get a lot of confidence about if we do 6 sessions, we see some pretty big shifts before and after on some of the screening tools or tracking tools we might use in symptom reduction. But no one has kind of studied 4 sessions enough and then compared the two to say 4 sessions isn't helpful. So clinically, you see a wide range of how people kind of create treatment plans for folks. And some of it has to do with the complexity or the acuity of folks, or if they want to be medically monitored during the experience. It can also be administered intramuscularly in an injection. And it can also be given to people in oral tablets that you can let dissolve and swish or swallow. There's all sorts of different folks trying to kind of figure out the best protocol, but often, depending on the setting that someone wants to have the opportunity, that might guide the route of administration. There is also a nasal spray of S-ketamine that has been uh, approved by the FDA, fast-acting
Mm.
treatment for depression. I think it's called Spravato. That's not anything I've dealt with personally, but some people will have that almost in an emergency room situation for suicidality or other treatment-resistant depression.
So when
But
somebody,
mostly,
oh,
oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to say when somebody receives this, I mean, I obviously if it's like through an IV or something, obviously you're in an office with someone there with you, right? Like, are you being monitored, or are you just home by yourself, taking a pill or nasal spray or whatever?
Yeah, so the IV is completely monitored. I am typically you're monitored because like a RN or someone has given it to you or it's done in a clinic setting. But most of the oral ketamine is done in all sorts of different settings now. A lot of times people might be at home or they might be in an office with a therapist. Um, they, the medical provider who prescribes it does all the work up to decide, is this a person who's a good candidate for it? Um, you know, there's some rule outs in terms of things that would disqualify someone from being a good candidate, like blood pressure issues. Um, and once approved for it, it's dispensed by a pharmacy, and then the patient or the client holds on to it like they would any other psychotropic medication prescription. It's a controlled substance, but it's theirs. They're holding on to it. And if bringing it to a therapist's office is kind of the main way I've been trained, although there are companies that, you know, people might have like a chaperone online who's not a provider, just sitting with them, being a facilitator.
Mm.
Um, so the journey is typically about 45 minutes or an hour. And depending on the dose people are using, sometimes it's combined, like low dose ketamine combined with therapy, or higher dose ketamine. You're really in more of kind of an internal state, and you wouldn't have really access to verbal processing at that time. So you
Mm.
save the integration for after the fact. Um,
Is there such thing as like a bad trip with ketamine?
uh, you know, I eh, the challenging experiences can totally happen to anyone, and often the way I believe it to be is it's someone might experience something on ketamine that uh they weren't ready to experience. But I believe in kind of the organic wisdom too of what comes up. It's not like a bad trip is typically some terrible thing happened to someone and they experienced like just a bad reaction. It's more like most of the time is someone went somewhere on the medicine because their innate healing intelligence knew that was something they needed to go look at.
Mm.
And that person, didn't want to go look at that. And the ketamine will drop a lot of our protective defenses. So we'll go places that our normal everyday psyche is sometimes blocked or not having us go look at.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, it'll bypass some of those typical protector parts we have inside of us that keep us defended against some of these pieces. So that's why the preparation is so important for a therapist to kind of gauge, like, how ready is this person to kind of, drop the control and see what can happen. And then, having support along the way, best case scenario, and then a space to integrate what came up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think can make all the difference between someone reporting like a challenging experience or not.
So how does somebody get started? So they want to try this. I imagine different states have different laws, and I'm in good old fashioned Tennessee, where I think liquor is still illegal in some counties. So, um, and probably for the best, actually, but that's a different story. So yeah, how does one? Because obviously, I imagine you need to have a like ADHD meds, like you need, like any medication, you need a prescription, I assume, from a RN or a doctor of some sort. So yeah,
Mhm.
how does that work?
Yeah, so ketamine can be accessed in all 50 states. I've been trained to use other psychedelic medicines, but don't actively practice because it also living in Tennessee. It's not accessible here for folks without doing underground work. Um, but yeah, a medical doctor needs to prescribe it. It's a controlled substance, but they typically want to do an eval to substantiate enough of a diagnostic presence of depression, anxiety, PTSD, some sort of mental health concern that then they have the clinical rationale to say this person would benefit from treatment. And then with a prescription, it's dispensed often by a compounding pharmacy. They'll mail it to people. Then you'll be in, possession of enough for a course of treatment. You don't get refills. You don't get like a ton to just do whatever with.
Yeah.
So it's pretty thoughtfully monitored. Um, or, like I said, there's folks that offer clinics around the country. If you felt more comfortable being monitored by a healthcare professional while you were taking it, that's always an option as well.
Hmm.
Um, you know, how much therapy people do around taking ketamine is really up to the consumer in a lot of ways, because there's ways to do it through big online telehealth companies where you don't have to do hardly any clinical support. Um, best case scenario, because I'm biased, I think it's done within a lot of clinical support to both get all the benefits you could possibly get out of it,
Yeah.
and, take advantage of someone supporting you through behavior change during this open window of neuroplasticity, helping you make sense of anything challenging that pops up. But, not everyone can afford or would have access to someone who's trained who could provide that type of therapy. So there's also spaces online where people are trying to host integration circles or, you know, remote or online options for people who are in more of a remote setting. So there's totally workarounds. I wish it was easier for people to have it within the context of a lot of
Hmm.
therapeutic care.
Is has So like let's assume best case scenario, someone does the six doses, and one of their biggest things is to, for the sake of the conversation, like get rid of that horrible feeling, that Sunday scaries feeling. And that's sort of, let's say, their goal is just like, obviously that's pretty easy thing, but uh if that's their goal going into it, like, let's say, when they come out on the other end, is it after six doses, let's say, does it mean they're sort of cured of the thought of the Sunday scaries,
Mm.
or that they're, or like, how, because I think with like trauma, you obviously, it's not like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, right? Like referencing all these 90s movies, I admit, but you're not like erasing memories.
No.
So,
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah, and anyone who promises a particular outcome at the end of it, like, you should be very hesitant about working with that person because a lot is really unknown, and I think we should be humble a lot with working with psychological or spiritual healing, how much is unknown. But um okay, so I'll give you two scenarios in which we would get wildly different outcomes using our Sunday scaries example. Okay, so let's say someone had a long history of bullying in childhood and they didn't realize how much this Sunday scaries thing was a holdover of just old emotional memory that was lingering with them about the dread they felt about starting school again, another week of being amongst peers that felt unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't tied that together. They were just sort of going along with the trope of like, yeah, nobody likes a Monday or whatever. But lo and behold, they actually, through the process with the intention of, I want to understand why I feel this every Sunday, they start to understand the like grouping of memories and experiences and what maybe this 12-year-old part of them is still holding on to. They might get incredible resolution of the memory reconsolidation happening, and their body understands they're not a 12-year-old anymore. So you actually don't have to dread Monday.
So it's almost like reframing, right? Like you're
Mhm.
reframing those thoughts, which a lot of therapy can also help with, and meditation,
Yeah.
mindfulness.
Yeah. The gold standard to get stuff like that to go away is memory reconsolidation, where the brain reorganizes and stops predicting. This is a good way to anticipate.
Mm.
It's kind of a more updated schema of like, we actually don't need to think of it that way.
Mm.
But in my other example of someone who's probably not going to get a lot of benefit, let's say this person's in a dead end career or something that's very hard for them. They picked a path that maybe their parents wanted for them, they don't like. They go through the ketamine process and hope to really understand this Sunday scaries feeling. But lo and behold, they're at a place in their life where they're not willing to change or not have this career or this role anymore. So in that case, it's actually quite adaptive for their body to still predict discomfort on Monday. And they might not, without like lifestyle changes or being willing to make a big shift for themselves, they might continue to feel that, but maybe they have more insight around like why that's so bad for them.
Right.
But it like the body won't reorganize unless it's, in the moment safe to let go of those feelings. So, two people could have the same goal, same intention, and get wildly different responses.
And I know you're not a, sorry to interrupt. I know you're not a, like a scientist or a scientist or something, but,
Not at all.
either am I. So, but, has there been any evidence, and you can say you don't know, that's fine, of course, as we've already established, but,
Mhm.
with like a fMRI, like like as a trained improviser, like I study with the Second City in Toronto and I have a lot of improv background. And I have found, go figure, a lot of ADHDers also love improv. There's something to that, I'm sure, anecdotally. And I teach people a lot about improving the way they communicate from using tools from improv. But I digress there. But there is science behind there's a scientist a doctor who studied the brains of musicians with an fMRI that studied their brain activity, and they could put it up on a screen, and while in the machine they have like a keyboard, and they start playing memorized music, excuse me, sheet music or whatever. I guess not sheet, but like memorized music. So they're playing a memorized song, and the brain is lit up accordingly. And then they start improvising, and lo and behold, way other sections of the brain are lit up now. And the same they've also done it with like freestyle rapping, where someone is rapping like famous, memorized lyrics, and then they start rapping freestyle, and once again, improvised, their brains are lit up accordingly. Has there been any research or studies showing the brain lit up differently with ketamine?
Well, now I have to go look after we are done talking because
Yeah.
I don't know in terms of what most of the research has shown for validating. I think a lot of times people will use tools. I know there's a lot of research when people are using these validated screeners and assessment tools. Like a popular one most people see at their doctor is a PHQ-9, which has a bunch of the symptoms of major depression. And every time we go to physicals nowadays, we're all circling how often we're feeling these problems. And,
Hmm.
often people will use tools like that, probably just because they're really easy. I see that quite a bit. But now I'm very curious to know like what else they've done to kind of illuminate these changes that can
Hmm.
happen. Because they're very confident about what it's doing, like increasing BDNF and glutamate and all these things, but I have no idea how. And I've been the type of person I don't have enough interest to digest the research, so I can't get my
Yeah.
brain to hook into that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's fair. And thank you. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that is fair. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. And I know, yeah, it's something I definitely am keen to explore. I have done, well, I was going to say psilocybin, but let's just say shrooms. In my youth, I did shrooms and I did acid a couple times, and certainly, so I'm familiar with tripping, as the kids say or said or whatever. Uh, but so I understand that uh, that the brain or the mind at least can certainly, create all sorts of different visions and things. And I am a practitioner and a big believer in the power of meditation and mindfulness and also therapy, to learn to reframe thoughts and to look at things differently. Um, One of the examples I've used before is about how, as a speaker, like I love getting up on stages and speaking to, or a small group or speaking to thousands. I love it. And performing improv too. But as a keynote speaker doing that, I love it. And part of that is because of the dopamine I'm receiving, given my ADHD. But also just getting the feedback from the audience in those moments, is just incredibly rewarding and feels great. And so, I think the dopamine aspect is interesting to think about, but also, which is, factual with ADHDers scientifically. And also to your point about depression and ticking those boxes. I mean, anxiety and depression are the most common comorbidities that come along with ADHD. Like when I'm speaking to people often about this, I'm like, they're kind of depression or anxiety or both, or sort of strange bedfellows who like to come along with ADHD. And so if you're an ADHDer, there's a likeliness that you might also, I know, especially with women, we were talking about that earlier, women tend to be traditionally have been diagnosed with depression or anxiety or something, missing the ADHD in the diagnosis, which is really often the I use the term root cause carefully because I don't know if that's the perfect way to say it, but ADHD is often in the background. That might be part of the reason why you're experiencing, clinical anxiety or depression. And so without treating that ADHD, you may be treating anxiety and depression, but that may come back because, hello, ADHD is still there in the background. So anyway, brought it back to ADHD, but I'm definitely, I'm definitely keen to explore ketamine because, it sounds like a really rewarding experience. So if anybody wants to mail me 6 doses of ketamine, let me know. But yeah, no, this has been great. Was there anything I didn't ask you about? I know we've gone way over, but it's been a fascinating conversation.
No, this feels really fun. It had a cool chance to kind of look at all the little pieces that are my topics of the year that I like thinking and working myself.
Yeah.
Thank for that. Keep my little dopamine hit for today.
There you go. Well, that's great. I do want to say thanks again, Amanda. This has been fascinating. How can folks get a hold of you, learn more about what you do, how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've kept everything just mostly as a hub on my website, so I can share the link with you. I continue to practice here in Tennessee. I'm licensed in Colorado and California too, and love working with people who are interested in more of this root cause, deep dive approach to things, or feel like they've done coping skills and talk therapy and they have the insight, but something's still a little bit stuck. Those are my favorite folks to work with. So if people ever want to reach out, I also, just as a passion project of mine, sometimes I'll get people emailing me or talking to me in real life that I'm not the right fit for them, but I often love to be a referral source for people if they just have questions. I think mental health is very tricky for the average consumer to understand how to get care, and the social work side of my heart loves just kind of being a matchmaker almost. Sometimes I'll have people tell me what's going on, and I don't work with everything, but I know a lot about who they should see for that type of issue, having done a lot of work in primary care for many years. So I'm always open to that. I don't want people to feel stuck or cut off. My email's on my website. It's pretty easy to get a hold of me there.
Do you want to share the website address?
Oh, yeah. It's Amanda Johnson, lcsw.com.
If you enjoyed the show today, please leave a rating and review. This helps other Wise Squirrels discover the show and reminds me to keep doing this. Do you have questions or comments? Want to share an audio comment or question? Do you have questions about joining the nest? Or are you interested in a free coaching session with me? Just visit wisesquirrels.com for details. Support of the podcast comes from our generous sponsors, our guests, and you. Thank you for being here. Without you, I'd be talking to myself, and that's no fun. Hosting for Wise Squirrels is provided by our friends at the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. You'll find special event invitations, links, show notes, free resources, and a whole bunch more at wisesquirrels.com. And while you're there, sign up for the newsletter. That way you'll never miss another episode. We'll see you soon. Thanks for being here.
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. With school out, summer is the perfect time to teach our kids real-world money skills they'll use forever. Greenlight is a debit card and the #1 family finance and safety app used by millions of families, helping kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely. Parents can send their kids money and track their spending and saving, while kids build money confidence and skills in fun ways. Start your risk-free Greenlight trial today at greenlight.com/Spotify. That's greenlight.com/Spotify.